Imagine you're standing in the cereal aisle. Your 4-year-old has been fine for 40 minutes, genuinely fine, chatting, helping you find things, and then without any visible warning, they collapse. Not figuratively, literally. They're on the floor of the grocery store, and you're holding a box of oatmeal, and other shoppers are doing that thing where they look and then look away, and your child is saying they want to go home in a voice that is escalating towards something you recognize and dread. You try the usual things. You offer choices. You lower your voice. You promise a snack. Nothing lands. And somewhere in the back of your mind a thought forms, why can't they just handle this? Most parents, in that moment, reach for one of two explanations. Either something is wrong with their child, they're too sensitive, too dependent enough, or something is wrong with their parenting. They've been too soft, too accommodating, too present. Both explanations feel bad. Both, it turns out, miss what's actually happening. What the research in developmental psychology shows is that a child who can't seem to function without you nearby isn't weak or spoiled. They're in the middle of a process, a neurological, relational, developmental process that your presence is actively building, not undermining. The goal was never to be less involved. The goal was to be involved in the right way at the right time. By the end of this, you'll understand what's actually driving that grocery store meltdown, what a specific parenting habit, a well-meaning, completely logical habit, does to a child's developing capacity to be alone, and what small adjustments can change the trajectory without requiring you to parent differently every waking moment. The science starts with a structure in the brain called the prefrontal cortex. This is the part responsible for regulating emotion, tolerating frustration, delaying gratification, and staying calm when things feel chaotic. In adults, it's reasonably well developed. In a 4-year-old, it is not. It won't be fully mature until the mid-20s. This is not a metaphor or a parenting excuse. It is literal neuroscience. The circuit that allows a person to think, "I'm upset, but I can manage this," is still being built in your child's brain, year by year, experience by experience. What fills the gap while that circuit develops is the relationship, specifically the relationship with a primary caregiver. When a young child is dysregulated, meaning their nervous system is overwhelmed, and they can't self-soothe, the presence of a calm-attuned adult doesn't just comfort them emotionally. It literally helps regulate their biology. Their heart rate slows, their cortisol levels drop, their breathing shifts. This is called co-regulation, and it's not a warm and fuzzy concept. It's a measurable physiological process. The child's nervous system borrows the stability of the adult's nervous system until their own can come back online. Here's why that matters for independence. The brain builds its self-regulation capacity through repeated experiences of being regulated, first by someone else, then by itself. Think of it like a muscle. Co-regulation isn't the opposite of self-regulation. It's the practice ground for it. Every time a child experiences being brought back from overwhelm through connection with a calm adult, the neural pathways that will eventually allow them to do that for themselves get a little stronger. The sequence is always co-regulation first, self-regulation second. You cannot skip the first step and expect the second to develop. There's also the amygdala to consider. This is the brain's alarm system, and in young children it is highly active and not particularly precise. When something feels threatening, a loud noise, a transition, a moment of sensory overload, an unexpected change in routine, the amygdala fires, triggering a stress response before the thinking brain has any chance to weigh in. This is why logic doesn't work on a melting down 4-year-old. You can explain very calmly that you're leaving the grocery store in 5 minutes, and they already knew that. And it doesn't matter, because the part of the brain processing your words is currently offline. The amygdala has taken over, and the only thing that brings it back down is felt safety, meaning the physical and emotional presence of someone the child trusts. What this creates, developmentally, is a system where the child's growing capacity for independence runs directly through attachment, not around it. The more securely attached a child feels, meaning the more reliably their distress is met with connection, the more willing they are to explore away from the caregiver. This seems counterintuitive until you understand that exploration requires a felt sense of safety, and felt safety comes from the relationship. The secure base isn't a leash, it's a launch pad. Now here's where the parenting habit enters the picture. When parents misread what a child's need for closeness means, they often respond in one of two ways that both unintentionally slow down the development they're hoping to encourage. The first misreading sounds like this: my child needs space to figure things out on their own. This comes from a completely reasonable place. You've probably been told, in some form, that children need to learn to self-soothe, to work through frustration independently, to not always run to a parent when something feels hard. The logic holds up on the surface. Independence is the goal, so practice independence. But when this is applied to a child whose nervous system is genuinely overwhelmed, what they experience isn't a lesson in resilience. They experience abandonment at the moment they needed a bridge. And over time, what gets trained is not independence, but hypervigilance. The child learns that distress is not reliably met, and so their attachment system stays on high alert. They become the child who cannot seem to let you out of their sight, not because they were given too much connection, but because they were given connection that felt unpredictable. The second misreading is subtler and harder to name, and it's actually the habit this video is about. It goes like this: my child is upset, I should fix it, quickly, fully, before they have to sit in the discomfort for very long. This one is easy to understand because it comes from love. When your child is distressed, you feel it. Your own nervous system responds to their distress, and the fastest way to regulate both of you is to make the problem go away. So you step in, you solve it, you remove the obstacle, offer the thing they want, smooth the transition, prevent the frustration before it fully arrives. You are present in the most devoted possible way. And the habit, accumulated over time, becomes one where the child never quite has the experience of moving through difficulty with you, alongside rather than in front of them. You're not absent, you're actually very present. But your presence is always one step ahead of the discomfort, absorbing it before the child has to. The third misreading is the interpretation of clingy as problematic. When a child reaches for connection repeatedly, follows you from room to room, protests separations longer than seems normal, or needs you present to fall asleep, it's easy to read this as a problem to solve. Too much attachment, not enough independence. The truth is closer to the opposite. Clingy behavior is most often a bid for regulation. The child is telling you, through behavior rather than words, that their nervous system needs help coming back to baseline. Reading it as manipulation or excessive need tends to produce responses that increase the behavior rather than reduce it. Now let's look at what the research actually shows about how children develop the capacity to be alone, genuinely alone, content, and self-directed, because it's more specific and more hopeful than most parents realize. The first finding comes from attachment research, particularly the work built on what John Bowlby described, and Mary Ainsworth's strange situation studies. What this body of research shows consistently is that secure attachment, meaning the child has learned through repeated experience that their distress will be met with reliable warm response, predicts greater independence at every age tested, not less. Securely attached toddlers explore more freely than anxiously attached toddlers. Securely attached school-age children handle separation from parents more smoothly. The mechanism is the internal working model. When a child has an internalized sense that connection is available and reliable, they carry that sense with them even when the caregiver isn't physically present. The secure base becomes portable. It lives inside them. But it only gets there through enough experiences of the external secure base first. The second finding has to do with how self-regulation actually develops, and it's built on Lev Vygotsky's concept of scaffolding and the zone of proximal development. The zone of proximal development is a space between what a child can do alone and what they can do with support. Vygotsky's insight was that development happens in this zone, not in the zone of what they can already do alone, and not in the zone of what they cannot do at all, but right in the middle, where a capable, attuned other person can provide just enough support to make the task possible. Applied to emotional regulation, this means the most growth happens when the challenge is real and the support is present. Not when the challenge is removed, and not when the child is left to face it without help. The parent who says you're okay, you can do this, I'm right here, and means it, is operating in the zone of proximal development. The parent who solves the problem before the child encounters it is staying outside the zone entirely. The third finding is about executive function, the cluster of cognitive skills that includes working memory, cognitive flexibility, and inhibitory control. These are the skills that allow a person to manage themselves, switch between tasks, hold a goal in mind while managing distraction, and tolerate the gap between wanting something and getting it. Research by Adele Diamond and others has shown that executive function develops most robustly in environments that are warm and predictable, where the child feels safe enough to attempt hard things, and where the adult relationship provides consistency rather than unpredictability. Executive function is impaired by chronic stress and by environments where the child cannot predict whether their needs will be met. This is another mechanism through which the anxious attachment pattern limits independence. The chronic low-level stress of unpredictable caregiving taxes executive function, leaving the child with fewer internal resources to manage difficult moments. The fourth finding is about what researchers call still-face studies and moments of misattunement. Edward Tromik's research showed that when a caregiver suddenly becomes emotionally unresponsive, even briefly, infants show marked distress, but equally important is what Tromik called the repair. When the caregiver returns to attunement after a moment of disconnection, the infant recovers, and over time, these microcycles of connection, rupture and repair build what researchers describe as resilience and flexibility in the child's emotional response system. The takeaway isn't that parents need to be perfectly attuned at all times. That's impossible and probably not even ideal. The takeaway is that repair matters enormously. Children whose caregivers consistently return to connection after moments of disconnection develop a more flexible, regulated nervous system than children who never experience rupture, but also never experience the repair. What this means practically is that your imperfect moments, the times you were too harsh or too distracted or too overwhelmed to respond the way you wanted to, are not the problem, provided you come back. The coming back is developmentally significant. It teaches the child, below the level of language, that relationship can be repaired, that disconnection is temporary, that they don't need to be in a state of permanent alertness, because things tend to come back together. This is one of the actual building blocks of the capacity to be alone. Trust that absence is not permanent, that the person will return, that the world is basically safe. Let's look at what all of this actually looks like when you're in it, because research findings are useful, but they don't tell you what to do when you're standing in the cereal aisle. Your child is 4 years old and has been playing alone for about 8 minutes, which for a 4-year-old is actually a reasonable stretch. And then they appear at your elbow while you're trying to answer an email. They're not distressed. They just want you near. They start talking about something from their game, or asking you to watch, or pulling at your sleeve. You're in the middle of a thought, and you feel beneath your love for this person a flicker of frustration. You've been patient all day, and you just need 5 minutes. The underlying need here is not actually entertainment, it's proximity. The child's attachment system has run its check-in cycle. They went out, they played, they hit the limit of how far their felt sense of security extends, and now they're doing what human children are biologically wired to do, which is return to the secure base and refuel. If the check-in is met, not with elaborate attention, just with a brief warm acknowledgement, a moment of genuine contact, the attachment system quiets and they can go back to playing. If the check-in is repeatedly ignored or deflected, the attachment system escalates. The bids for connection get louder and more frequent because the signal isn't getting through. The response that helps is not putting down everything you're doing every time. It's brief and real. I see you. I want to hear about your game. Give me 3 minutes and I'll come look. And then you follow through. The response that escalates is the distracted half-present acknowledgement that isn't quite an acknowledgement, the MMHM that doesn't land, which sends the child back to their game with the attachment system still unsatisfied, which means they'll be back sooner and louder. Your child is 6 years old and having genuine difficulty with a puzzle or a homework problem or something they want to build. You can see the answer. They're getting frustrated, their breathing is changing, and you know this arc, you've watched it before, and it ends in tears and the puzzle being shoved off the table. So you step in, you explain, you rearrange the pieces a little, you show them where the edge piece goes. What's happening underneath is that they're sitting inside the zone of proximal development, right at the edge of what they can do, and the frustration is the sign that the challenge is real. This is where growth happens. The response that helps is staying close, narrating what you see. You're trying to fit that corner piece I noticed the blue part needs to match up. And waiting, keeping your hands out of it while keeping your presence in it. You are the scaffold, not the builder. The response that takes the developmental moment away is doing the task for them, which removes the frustration but also removes the experience of moving through frustration, which is what builds the tolerance for it over time. Your child is 3 and it's bedtime, and the routine is familiar and nothing is wrong, and still they cannot seem to let you leave the room. Every time you move toward the door, it escalates. This has been going on for months, and you're exhausted and at some point you have to leave. What's happening is that the developmental task of this age, tolerating separation, is real and hard and doesn't resolve overnight. The nighttime is when the attachment system is most active, because darkness and stillness remove the sensory information that helps children feel oriented and safe. What helps is a predictable, warm goodbye, the same words in the same order, a clear signal that you're leaving, and a clear promise that you'll be there, with follow-through on whatever check-in you've promised. "I'll come check on you in 5 minutes" works if and only if you actually come back in 5 minutes. If you sometimes come back and sometimes don't, the uncertainty keeps the system activated. Predictability is calming. The response that escalates is the extended, progressively more anxious negotiation at the door, where your own anxiety about leaving communicates to the child that there is, in fact, something to be worried about. Your child is 8 years old, and you've given them a Saturday afternoon with no plans, no screens, nothing organized. And within 20 minutes, they're at your side, saying they're bored and there's nothing to do, and can you please do something with them? What this isn't is failure of imagination or a deficit of creativity. What it is often is a child who hasn't had enough practice with unstructured, internally directed time, and whose boredom tolerance, which is essentially a form of distress tolerance, hasn't had a chance to develop, often because the schedule has been full enough that boredom never fully arrives. The underlying need here is support in entering the discomfort of unstructured time, not rescue from it. I know it feels weird. I'm not going to help you figure out what to do, but I'm here. And then you stay warm while the boredom does its work. Now, for what you can actually do with any of this, because the goal here isn't more information to feel uncertain about. The first shift is probably the most useful. Instead of asking yourself whether your child can handle this, try asking yourself what level of support would help them handle this. The question isn't presence versus absence. It's what kind of presence. A child who needs you in the room to do a hard thing is not showing you they can't do hard things. They're showing you what size scaffold they need right now. You can adjust the size of the scaffold over time gradually, but removing it entirely and wondering why the building collapses is not a developmental strategy. The second shift is about the instinct to solve. The next time you see your child frustrated with something they're technically capable of, try staying close and saying nothing useful for a beat longer than feels comfortable. You don't have to let them struggle indefinitely, but the gap between their frustration and your intervention is the space where something grows. Even if they don't solve it today, they learned that frustration is survivable, that you being nearby doesn't mean you'll take the wheel, that they have more capacity than the frustration tells them they do. The third shift is about check-ins. If your child repeatedly interrupts your time, and they will, because they're children, consider building in a brief, real moment of connection before they need to come looking for it. Not a long one. 2 minutes of genuine phone down, eyes on them attention has a measurable calming effect on the attachment system that often buys a longer stretch of independent play than the stretch that ended in interruption. You're not training them to expect constant attention. You're filling the cup before it runs dry, which means it doesn't run dry as quickly. The fourth shift is about what you say when separations are hard. "You'll be fine" is well-intentioned, but doesn't land because the child's nervous system doesn't know that yet. What lands is something that acknowledges the feeling and provides the structure. "I know it feels hard to say goodbye. I'm coming back at 3 o'clock, you can miss me, and still have a good morning." Both things are true. Naming both things doesn't intensify the feeling, it gives the child a frame for holding it. The fifth shift is about repair. If you've been the parent who steps in too quickly, who smooths too much, who has built a pattern where your child expects intervention before frustration fully arrives, that's not a problem that requires a new parenting philosophy. It's a pattern that shifts gradually, through small, consistent moments of staying present, without fixing. You don't need to announce a new approach, you just try it once, and then again. And your child gradually learns that the scaffold has changed shape slightly, and that they have more capacity than the old arrangement allowed them to discover. Go back to the cereal aisle. The same scene, but now you know what's actually happening. Your child is on the floor, and their nervous system is genuinely overwhelmed. The length of the errand, the sensory environment, the transition that's coming. The fact that it's probably close to a meal. The meltdown isn't manipulation. It isn't evidence of too much indulgence or too little resilience. It's a brain that ran out of regulatory resources, which is a developmental fact, not a personal failing of yours or theirs. You crouch down to their level. You're not going to fix the grocery store or make the oatmeal more interesting. You're just going to be physically calm and close. It's been a long trip. We're almost done. You don't explain or negotiate. You're just a regulated nervous system next to a dysregulated one. And over the next 2 minutes, theirs will begin to follow yours down. It won't always work this smoothly. Some days are harder. Some developmental phases are longer than feels reasonable. But understanding the mechanism, that connection is the path to independence. That co-regulation precedes self-regulation. That the capacity to be alone is built inside relationship rather than in spite of it, changes what you're doing when you stay close. You're not preventing independence. You're building it from the inside out, one ordinary moment at a time. That's the whole thing. Not a system, not a protocol, just a slightly different understanding of what your child is asking for when they ask for you, and what you're giving them when you show up.